Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of The Lowdown from Analysis.Tech. I'm John Reimer, one of the principals at Analysis.Tech, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Rob Koplowitz. Rob, welcome.
Hey,
And
glad to be here.
Francis Carden. Francis, welcome.
That's me.
So we're going to try something a little different, folks. Those of you who have tuned in to podcasts featuring Francis as a co-host are undoubtedly recall that Francis is very passionate about the research that we do here at Analysis.Tech and about the topic overall. And we just don't think Francis has had a format yet in our podcast to really let his passion unfurl. So here we go, guys. We're calling this Francis Rants or something like that, and we're just going to give Francis a platform to discuss the ideas that he has. Just full up. So strap in, guys, because it may be a wild ride. So Rob, why don't you kick us off? Thanks.
All right, Francis. So
No,
start ranting, I guess is kind of where we begin. But I think maybe if we could tee up one sort of passionate area for you, and I think an area that's actually pretty evident in our research is we often talk about reimagining the computing environment, not re-engineering it, not optimizing it, not making it more efficient, but reimagining the art of the possible. And this is directly from your, we got this term from you. Give us the background on this. What are you ranting about when you talk about reimagining computing? What's changed and how should we be thinking about this?
yeah, and I think to be clear, it's reimagining computing, but everything that then sits on top of it. Reimagine the processes, reimagining the applications, just reimagine the way work gets done. And so, quick history lesson then for me is that before computing even started, we humans learned the necessary through training. They learned how to do the ledgers, the balancing, writing an invoice up, writing an insurance quote. All that stuff was done manually, right? Because that's all there was. When computers became a thing, you took the person who knew those processes or those or were trained on that process, or you call them domain experts later. They sat alongside a coder who tried to interpret what they did manually and turned it into something that could be done automatically on a computer, the computerization era. And the problem was that coding was the interface between what the domain expert knew and what the computer programmer knew about the computers it needed to run on. Okay. And so we ended up with decades of spaghetti code that some of it that was written 40 years ago is still actually being used, which is sad in itself. But that was why we needed code. That was the only reason we needed code, because there was no other way to get the computer to do what you needed it to do. Well, roll forward 50 years. If we just started the computer era now with all that we've got with cloud, unlimited compute power, et cetera, would we even bother learning a language? Right? Would we need to code at all? Would we go, let's come up with some coding, or let's come up with a complex language that allows us to tell the computer to do what we want to do? Well, we've now proved with AI that you don't need to do that. And so that's why I think the whole game has changed finally. And I think it did actually change probably 10, 15 years ago with low code, no code, but that never won the war. In fact, everybody says low code, no code is dead, right? So let's just go with that. Right? Everything's dead. So why not reimagine everything then? And that's really the premise that I'm at here.
So Francis, let's you skipped an interim step, which I think is interesting to this conversation, which is, well, wait a minute. You don't have to code this stuff. Let us code it for you. We'll just give you a SaaS application. You'll all do it pretty much the same way, except you'll customize the living crap out of it on top of it and make another spaghetti code mess. And you'll pay us in perpetuity a fortune, a bloody fortune, to use the British term. I mean, why shouldn't that just be the solution, Francis?
That was the solution, right? But that's what we hired. The people who built the application in the first place to automate these processes, the programmers, they got bored after a year, 2 years maybe, and they wanted to work on the next project or learn the next language or learn the next best thing to boost their career. So these applications got done as best they could. And then get on with it. So other people came along, tried to interpret that code, didn't necessarily figure it out, and so wrote more bespoke code, more custom code, more configuration code, all paid great big SIs, lots and lots of money to manage it for them in perpetuity. That is the legacy debate. Where if would we ever say, well, I'm going to build an application today and it's going to be so complex you're going to have to support it for the next 40 years. Good luck. We're not going to do that anymore, are we? So why should we be stuck with all the old shite, as they say? So I think that's really why I'm quite adamant now that so many things have changed over the last 10 years, but really an assimilation, because AI has now proved it's possible, that we don't need to train individuals. We don't need the uniqueness of these applications with this custom code, right? Or these customized versions of a process to enable onboard a customer or to pay an insurance claim. I think that 95% of most businesses in the same business could get along with it being the same. Why do I care that my application is like your application? I'm going to compete because I have better services. I'm going to compete because I have a better products and I have better people that can service you. Not because I have the best IT team that 2 years ago built the best program that I'm now spending billions of dollars to try to support.
That's a really controversial idea, but it's an important idea, Francis, that most businesses, and I think we often talk about banking, right? Banking, core banking is banking, and banks don't do core banking, demand deposits, lending, et cetera, all differently. There's a lot of commonality in how they operate and what their processes are. So why should a company do all this customization when the core is it's commodity at this point?
And
Well,
maybe legally regulated.
Well,
more,
sure, and
Like, maybe
legal
it has to be
regulation is
commoditized because
is part of why it's a commodity.
right. Right.
well, and if you think there, I don't know how many banks there are, let's say 5,000 around the world, all running their own onboarding process, all running their own driving license validation process, all of those things. There wasn't a lot of different. You could before computing, you could move from one bank to another bank and quickly learn that's that job, right? How that bank is slightly different. Those variations and differences back then were probably representing less than 5% the differences between each bank you went to work for. Computerization actually created 100% variation because all the code was different for every single bank. Now, we saw packaged software come along, 20, 30 plus years ago. And the idea of packaged software was also to solve this problem. But they weren't very good packaged applications because everybody configured the hell out of them by going back to the source code, modifying it, configuring it. And so actually, the packaged apps became just as bad as the in-house coded apps because there was so much customization and nobody knew where that customization code lived.
Okay, let me call bollocks here for a moment.
Or not.
And John, you're falling a little bit behind on injecting gratuitous British terms. Can I throw
Bollocks.
Jolly good. Jolly good.
jolly good? Let me call bollocks for a moment while I get a biscuit. All right. We, Analysis.tech, have had radically different banking experiences with different institutions, right? So at the core, it is all the same. The processes are all the same. But we tried to get on board when we started off with a traditional bank, and we ended up using a more internet digital first bank. And it came down to a process, an edge process that the traditional bank was really stumbling with. There were FedExes going back and forth across the country. There were notaries being involved. And when we finally cut the cord and went to a fully digital bank, I think we were up and running in 10 minutes. So there are edge cases on which differentiation is still taking place. Doesn't that show up as custom code on top of these core systems, Francis?
You know what? I don't actually care what you do with that 5% variation. If you really want to code it, code it. If you want to use AI and Claude, use AI and Vibing and Claude. Whatever you choose is because one of the big issues for me right now is I think, and I do have to go head to head with the IT team, is kudos to what they've done for the last 50 years, but now you're in the way. Now, whether it's career-based protection because you want to keep these old systems alive because you're going to retire in 5 or 10 years, this is actually a big push to the board and to the CEO to say, do you realize that some of the things you're doing badly are actually being incentivized because the way you're hiring and the way you're trying to keep your IT alive? how can a digital bank become a digital bank without going to buy a single piece of legacy code when all the banks with legacy code say, we can't change, we can't reimagine because we've got all our old code? Well, I call BS on that. There's been some old legacy banks that have bought digital banks, merged them in, and thrown away all their old shite. Right.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think we're at this point. There's a bank out there called Starling Bank that started from nothing, just probably 7, 8 years ago, and now they're selling their bank software to other banks, and 95% of the code will remain the same across those banks.
Right.
So this isn't Francis saying we've already proved that this is the case. It was computing. What did we have to choose in the computing era? A little bit of a history lesson again. We had to choose the hardware vendor. We had to choose the language. We had to choose the database. Did we want a fat client or a thin client? A dumb terminal? Do we want it to run on a desktop or a mobile? What browser? What language? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's gone away. You can now write an application and run it to support 1 million people just by logging onto an Amazon server. So it's changed.
So Francis, you raised AI, which is an important piece of the puzzle. With AI, now you can generate anything. You could generate applications, you can generate code, you can generate images, you could even generate products. If you're using a 3D printer, you could generate physical things. So here's the thing. Your argument is against code, I think, except only when necessary. So much of what's being generated by AI these days is code. So we're right back to we're right back to where we started with the problem of code. What is your advice? What should people just say no to that, or should they? What
dig
should
in a
they
little
do?
bit. Dig in a little bit to what I actually said about code. I actually don't care if it's code or not. What I care about is if you then have to pay humans to figure out what the AI generated in that code to make sure there's no bugs, it's fully secure, it's fully governed, and it does everything you want it to do. That's the controversial issue right now. If you get AI to write 1 million lines of code, we're going to sit there and figure out, is that correct? What we need to do is get these components that make up 95% of businesses written in using AI or humans. It could be in code, but it's a model approach to code where you might never need to look at that code. A driving license validation is a brilliant example. How many different lines of code are there across the globe just to do driving license validation when probably 95% across the world, most driving license validations are going to be the same, maybe slightly different in Russia than it is in Turkey, than it is in Australia, but most of it's the same. So I think that what we need to do is come back to what a application needs to do, needs to be built up of components, and then train AI on how to pull together the components. So if I ask AI to build me something, it should say, you know what, we've already built this over there. Do you want me to use that? And then I'll let them know you've used it, and I'll keep track of where it's being used. And if you need any variations, we won't change the component. We'll write the variations as rules on the outside. It's how computing was promised, with object-oriented program, with
Yep.
structured
Yep.
code, with et
Yep.
cetera, right? So this is now we have the opportunity to fulfill the promise of computerization.
All right, I'm
Components.
gonna make a
Components again.
suggestion, guys, if we could, and tell me I'm full of, I don't know what the
Right?
British term for crap is.
There you go. I seen it.
I'm gonna make a suggestion, and the suggestion is this. We've been on this topic of core banking systems, which is our very, an example of any kind
One of
of
the most
major
complex.
mission critical core system that runs. It could be insurance, it could be claims, it could be any one of a number of things. It could be your finance system. This is one class of system that's treated in a certain way. And then there is a whole bunch of other applications that we build, which we could argue have been under automated for a variety of reasons, and have been static because there's no one to maintain them. So I think that's topic one. And I think topic two is, Francis, I think what you're referring to is a model and a platform, and those things come at a cost, right? So the nice thing about deploying code, even if it's AI generated, is it's kind of free-ish. I mean, okay, cut my head
Yeah,
off.
but
There's
I'm going to
a
call
million
BS.
names.
I'm going to call BS on that. I don't know if it's a British
But
term. I
maybe
think.
we'll call BS for next time, Francis, is what I'm
Well, so yeah,
suggesting.
no, and
Because
we
then
should dig deep.
we tee up the topic for the next podcast.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. But I just want to leave people thinking with this, which is that the very idea that you need to do anything but reuse stuff that's been built before. I don't care if it's code. I don't care as long as you don't have to touch it, because you don't have to touch it anymore. And that's what I mean by reimagining computing. There's nothing's the same anymore. And your issue about perpetuity, think about this. What did you not pay in perpetuity decades ago that you now are paying in perpetuity? Go back to the hardware vendors, open source, the database models, even the hardware. You used to rent the hardware. Now we're back to renting hardware again. They just call it SaaS. Anyway, think about it.
Yeah.
Let's leave it with that cliffhanger. What do you think, John?
Yeah, listen, this is this turned out to be exactly as I hoped, in that we leave with additional questions, because there's so many questions. Francis, thank you for ranting. I think you raised some really good points, and hopefully our audience found it stimulating and thought provoking, because I think you're right. We do need to think ahead better than we are. So
The
thanks for
key is we
dialing
need
in,
these
folks.
discussions, and we need the cat amongst the pigeons, which is what I hope we've done.
All right, very good. Thanks for dialing in, tuning in, folks. We will see you the next time on the next episode of The Lowdown by Analysis.
And Francis Rants.